Should the government regulate AI, and if so, how? We're joined by CBS News cybersecurity contributor Chris Krebs, who ran CISA in the first Trump administration, and Ben Buchanan, who advised President Biden and is now a professor at Johns Hopkins and an advisor to Anthropic. Good to have you both here.
Good to be here. Thanks for having us.
So this was a big change because President Trump and his advisors clearly saw something that led to a shift in their policy. They were very light touch, literally don't do anything. And now there was this executive order just a few days ago to have some step towards, I don't know if we can call regulating it because it's voluntary, but that the companies have to voluntarily provide their very sensitive technology 30 days before releasing it to let the government have a first look. What does this accomplish, Chris?
Well, I think the biggest concern was while there had been a sense that generative AI and some of the more advanced tools were giving cyber attackers and defenders better capabilities, it wasn't until about 2 months ago where Anthropic released their Mythos, or at least announced their Mythos preview, that really brought it, I think, to the forefront with cabinet secretaries like Scott Bessent in Treasury and some other folks. So they became more concerned. They go to the White House, say, hey, we need to take a bit more of a proactive approach. And so
they got concerned because business entities.
Yeah, I mean, in part, the finance sector, banks, Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan and a number of others were like, whoa. We need to pause. We need to think about what we're doing here. And we need to take a bit more robust security-focused approach on how we, as this avalanche of vulnerabilities that will be discovered by AI, how we prepare and ensure that we're not going to be overwhelmed.
Ben, 30 days for the government to conduct a full security vetting. Is that possible, or is this just sort of window dressing to say the government's doing something?
In the Biden administration, we built a capability at the AI Safety Institute to do quick voluntary testing of AI systems, including for cyber risks and for bio risks. So I think the tests themselves can go quickly, but that doesn't mean the government is going to do that in a fulsome way. So the jury, I think, is still out on how the president chooses to implement this.
Right.
But the timing here, I think, is not one of the pieces that worries me. It's more getting the details of what does this testing look for.
Right, and what's the consequence?
Exactly.
So like, can the government stop it? The whole risk and worry had been this would get in the way of America's arms race with China. Does this get in the way of America's arms race with China?
Not as it's currently written. No, I don't think so. And I don't even think even more stringent versions would. I do think what's happening here is you see the government wrestling with something that we wrestled with in the Biden administration. This technology is coming from the private sector. And in many respects, it's the first revolutionary technology that is primarily in its current form from the private sector. If you think about nukes or space or so much more, the government has and has had a role in all of those technologies, inventing them, shaping them. It doesn't really have that in AI. So the Trump administration is now trying to figure out how does it want to assert itself in this new domain that actually is quite different conceptually than many of the ones that came before it.
And in Congress, they haven't regulated, really.
Not yet. In fact, the executive order is very clear when it says this is not a licensing regime. There is not a pre-clearance mechanism, but it does set up a structure where the NSA, the National Security Agency, can define what a covered model is and then brings those models into the 30-day pre-review. And then you can look at maybe what some of the vulnerabilities that could be discovered, and then you can share those out with defenders, with industry, so that they are prepared. But separately this week, you had Congressman Obernolte introduce draft legislation that may give a requirement for submitting some of these subsequently covered models for pre-review and auditing by independent bodies on a twice-a-year basis.
Unclear if that's got a future, though.
But it's starting the conversation, which I think is critical.
So the president did say to reporters that all the big AI leaders are coming to the White House quite soon. He has said he's looking into the U.S. government taking an ownership stake in some AI companies. That means us U.S. taxpayers would own stakes. And it's been reported that OpenAI's Sam Altman also pitched an idea to Senator Bernie Sanders about transferring 50% of the equity of the top AI companies to a public fund. To both of you, would that work? What does that do? Is that just retrofitting what you said, which is the government needs to have some kind of hand in here?
It's certainly conceptually trying to address that question of what's the relation between the public and private sector. I think with something that is that drastic, the devil is really in the details, and we don't have any details of this meeting or even of Senator Sanders' proposal. So I think we've got a long way to go on making that real, and it feels incongruous with me of what does it mean to let the private sector run here? So I think there's a lot of complexity that's yet to be worked out in that proposal.
And on that note, it also creates a significant governance challenge. When you control, when you own part of whatever the tool is, it creates a conflict of interest and some self-dealing, perhaps, if you're also trying to regulate it. So again, the details here are what's going to matter. It is interesting that it's almost a horseshoe effect where you have both Republicans and Democrats that are talking about, perhaps we need to take an ownership stake in these models.
They seem scared. I mean, that seems to be the takeaway that's forcing a change in position. Ben, Anthropic, the company you advise, called for an international pause in AI development because of how fast the systems are improving. As I understand it, the concerns the models are becoming so advanced they can fix themselves without humans being involved?
The dynamic here that's very interesting is what we call recursive self-improvement. So the AI systems help the AI companies generate the next version of the system. And that can show up in a number of ways. One of the ways it can show up is the AI systems write the computer code for the next version. Another one is the AI systems do the research and some of the math and underlying conceptual work that leads to efficiencies in the next system. And now we increasingly see AI systems helping design the chips that are the lifeblood of this. So I think it is the case for a variety of reasons, recursive self-improvement, massive infrastructure investments. We should expect these systems to continue to get very good very quickly. And that does raise real national security questions, no matter who's president.
Do you expect that most companies are going to comply with this voluntary 30-day review, Chris?
Well, I think there's a separate mechanism that probably has more teeth, and that's what was issued on Friday, a national security presidential memorandum on the national security enterprise and the use of AI, which allows the Department of Defense to use the power of the purse, the procurement mechanisms to dictate what the policies are and who needs to submit to reviews and who will follow certain presidential or rather department level direction. So I think the executive order is an interesting framing for a government-wide approach, but the real movement, I think the real teeth is what's happening at the Department of Defense in dictating what the policies are for how vendors can dictate to the government on how models can be used.
In the Biden administration in 2023, we brought the companies to the White House to meet with the president, and they all made voluntary commitments, which they then followed through on to do independent red team testing for risks like cyber, for bio, to publish their testing results to the public. And they follow through on that. So I do think there's a history here of companies working with government, but I suspect both sides are going to have to do a lot more as this technology gets better.
I recall during the Biden administration, there was this agreement between the U.S. and China not to let AI touch nukes.
That's right.
As I understand it,
Right.
There's discussion about the risk towards biological weapons. OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google's AI initiative signed a letter saying that there should be a law to keep AI out of biological weapons.
Chris spoke very well, and you spoke very well about the cyber dimensions of the current set of models. I would look at these current models not as cyber models, but as generally capable models. And the bio
What does
frontiers,
that mean? Sorry.
they can do expert tasks in a wide variety of areas, not just in cyber, also in bio and the like. This was something that we were very alert to in the Biden administration. There's a long section on bio in the president's executive order in 2023. There's upside. AI can do a lot for medical discovery, but there also is legitimate concern that AI is outperforming PhD-level virologists on virology questions, and that could abet a bioweapons risk that is not hypothetical.
Okay, well, now you're scaring me. But I mean, do they need to be bilateral agreements between countries, or this is because we have the edge at this moment? America needs to set the rules of the road for everyone. I mean, essentially, they did for nuclear weapons, right? We had them first, but it was out of fear.
Look, AI, emerging technologies, quantum is going to present, I think, the same problem, but we're now entering this governance space where technology development is moving faster than democratic oversight and control can allow or provide. Yeah. And I think to your earlier question about they're scared, there's fear, it's they're overwhelmed. They don't really understand the technology. It's very complex. Understanding how to meaningfully intervene that's consistent with the American regulatory tradition that's light touch, free markets, capital markets. We're seeing a bit of, I think, a divide here on how to interact. But again, you are seeing some interesting parallels in direction of travel that's consistent between the administration, the Congress, and Democrats and Republicans that understand something needs to be done. We're just not quite sure what the mechanisms are just yet.
Yeah. And the technology is moving really quickly while that's being debated. Gentlemen, thank you for bottom lining this for us. We'll be right back in a moment.